Yes, at last, some practice. I don't know about you, but I'm a musician. I like to do things, play, sing, and so on. And we're just talking and talking. Very, very interesting talk, by the way. But let's have some practical to listen and to experience some practice. And we will now meet two music creators and technical innovators. And they both have very impressive CVs, actually. I don't know if you have read them, but they will give us a couple of demonstrations each. And then we have questions and answers afterwards. So my recommendation is write down all the questions you get in your head during the demonstrations. All questions are welcomed, aren't they? All questions, high and low, technical, art stuff, legal stuff, everything. All questions. And first up, Steve Levine. And I thought I'd try to make a proper introduction so everyone knows who we got here, actually. You have produced Beach Boys and all of the Culture Club's classic hits. And you have many, many, many other collaborations on your way. You're also an awarded radio producer. You have composed computer game soundtracks, Hyper Brawl, for example. And you're also a teacher, or what is your title?
Well, it's sound technology students at LIPA, Paul McCartney's institute in Liverpool. They have one particular set of students that want to be future record producers. So they come to my studio and we have masterclasses.
You educate the future at
Yes.
Liverpool
Institute of Performing Arts.
Yeah, I have it here. Institute Performing Arts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we're really now looking forward to hearing how you actually use AI tools in your music productions and radio productions. So give a hand to Steve Levine.
Thank you. Just because I was near that. So I'm going to show you 3 examples of how I use AI in my production. And the 3 examples I'm going to use is the first one, which is restoration. The second one is, as we've been debating in these panels, using AI as a creative tool, but for the songwriting and development process rather than actually creating a finished product. And the third one, which I think was mentioned very briefly, is mastering software has developed quite a lot, enabling people that may record at home to be able to have professional results for the outside world. And I use the mastering software both on my recordings, but also on my radio programs, because I produce programs for the World Service. And the technical requirements of the World Service all around the world vary quite a bit because, for example, some of the African states still have very old radio technology, and so you have to make sure that the levels really, with modern production, work in their environment. So let's start with the first example. About 6 months ago, I filmed a documentary, which is going to be on Netflix very soon, about Culture Club being one of my biggest productions. And the story goes right back to the beginning of Boy George all the way through to the hits. And the directors of the program did some great research, and they said, Steve, we remember you did a very early demo of Do You Really Want to Hurt Me before the record was a hit. You don't happen to have that tape, do you? Because we've searched everywhere. The BBC can't find it, and the BBC notoriously had a period where they used to wipe everything. Now, I, at the time, said to the sound engineer, please, 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 can I have a copy of the tape? Now, in those days, it was kind of one of those weird things where it wasn't really allowed, but I, in my heart, knew that this was going to be an historic recording. We hadn't actually had any success with Culture Club at the time, so I managed to sneak this. It's a 7.5 IPS copy of the tape, 7th of May 1982. But that's all that exists of a very historical recording. That's the first version of Do You Really Want to Hurt Me, recorded before the record was made, but just after the demo. And we needed that to use in the television program in two ways. We needed to play the track, but they also wanted to use instrumental parts of it underneath George speaking about the session. And of course, we never had a multi-track. So using AI, I was able to do this. I transferred the audio into Logic. And one of the great things that Logic does is it works out the tempo of the track. This was not done to a click, it was just cut completely live. The other thing that's historically important about this track is that George sang the vocal live on this radio session, which prompted me to record the vocal live on the actual record. So the actual hit that everyone knows of Do You Really Want to Hurt Me, George sang that vocal 100% live from the top of the song to the end of the song. There's no punching in, no edits, absolutely live. But this is a slightly different version. So those that may be familiar with the record, I'll just play a bit of it so you can familiarise yourself with how it sounds. It's quite different.
Give me time to realize my crime. Let me love and steal.
And you can see the tempo is working out where it is because this was just done free time. And then it'll kick in.
How can I be real? Do you really want to hurt me? Do you really want to make me cry? Precious kisses, words that burn me. Lovers never ask you why.
So, that's the record as it is. I can't play any more than that. And I don't want this broadcast around the world because it's not actually been played since it was recorded. You're hearing something that no one else in the world has heard, and it hasn't gone on Netflix yet. So, Logic has this ability to what they call stem splitting, and it uses artificial intelligence to split the tracks. Now, how it works is you essentially press a button here, and see it says stem splitter, and it gives you the option to decide what you want to split out. So it can separate the vocal, it can separate just the drums, or you can choose. Now, the only thing about this is it takes about maybe 10 minutes to do. We don't have time to do that. So I have previously done it just to speed process up. So underneath here, in this folder, is the split stems. So what it does that is absolutely incredible is it allows you, first of all, to isolate just the vocals. So here's George's vocal now isolated, bearing in mind this is a stereo-ish mix. It's mainly mono, but it's essentially a mix.
Love and steal.
Isolated vocal.
I have danced inside your
Because it's isolated, it means I can actually add effects to it, like this. I could add some reverb or delay. And then if we just go along here.
Do you really want to hurt
So that's the
me?
isolated vocal.
Do you really?
Here's the isolated drums, which is fairly impressive. Also impressive is that it worked out the other elements. So hang on. Here's the that's the sort of top level of the kit. It isolated even the little drum thing here. And I used another piece of software to isolate the drums still further. So I have a third-party piece of software which literally looks at the, I'll just open that so you can see it. So this is called Restem. And what that does is you press record, press play, and it analyzes, again, it takes you can see it takes probably the length of the song and then maybe another 10 minutes to do it. But essentially, it can isolate the individual elements of the drums, and that's how I got the individual elements of the drums. Great thing here is that it remembered, when I recorded this bass, the bass was recorded through a chorus pedal, so it's split left and right, and the artificial intelligence has actually worked that out. So look, this is Mikey's bass. but with the actual original effect, which I thought was quite impressive. Here's the guitar, and then my terrible little keyboard. So it meant that for the television programme, I could give them this. I could give them a version of the track without any George. And the other thing that they could do is towards the end of the song, they could essentially bring George in and go. So once you've got the drums and all the bits separate, the other thing that Logic can do is I separated the individual elements of the drums. I can now use it. We mentioned MIDI earlier. I can now create a MIDI track of the individual drums. So I could, if I wanted to, replace the drums or add, because this is an old recording, it doesn't have the low end that a modern recording would have. So if, I don't know if you'll hear it on these speakers, but if I solo the kick with that in, actually it's not so noticeable on these speakers, but in my studio you can hear there's a much more rounded low end. So that's using AI to separate the individual elements from a literally mono recording, but also something that only exists as a 7.5 IPS. And I've actually used it with a client of mine who had a tape from the 1960s, which was a mono tape, 7.5 IPS, with a really famous person's demo. And he gave me the tape to do a similar thing with him to make just an enhanced version. We were able to take the originals, I won't say who it is, but it's somebody really famous, and it was like he was 16 when he did this demo, and we were able to add some reverb to his vocal and just make the track have just a bit more of a more modern approach and get rid of some of the noise that was on the original recording, which is great, because once you've got it isolated, you can obviously cut out the noise. Sorry. So that's the first example, which is stripping the audio from a stereo track. The next example is the sort of thorny issue that we've discussed in the panel of creating something from scratch. Now, there are so many different tools available. How Logic does it is you can specify certain things. Now, again, because things don't happen super fast, the first thing you can do is specify a chord progression. So you could take a very simple chord progression, as I've done there, and pop that in. You could then, once you've got the chord progression, it sort of understands where you're going. But you could, for example, say, well, I've got that bit that I really like. Where would I go from there? And you can, if you hold the key down here, you can say, look, it'll give you a new chord progression. So you can say, for the next section, I want it to be that, or whatever you want. And you, of course, can edit any little bit that you want. Once you've got your chord progression, you can decide, okay, what am I going to start with? Do I want to start with drums? Some people do like to start with drums. So if I delete the track that I've done, and you essentially say, I would like a new drum track in here, and there's two ways you can do it. You can say, give me a, if you see there, session player, give me a drummer, like that. So click on that. That's now just filled in a basic beat. So if I play that and solo it, this might be loud, chaps. So that's given me a basic rhythm. Now, I may not like that, but there's things I can now, we've used the word prompts, but these are not prompts as in words. These are musical prompts as in, okay, do I want a pop rock kit or do I want a retro kit? So it'll load in some samples that might be from a more lo-fi kit, or indeed a jazz kit, or a rock kit, or a punk kit. Once you've got the sonic sound that you like, you can then decide other things. How complex do I want it? So, for example, if we play this again, if I move this fader up, notice more bits appear, look. It's making it more complicated. Or if I take it right down, it's really simple. I could make it more intense. You could also specify things, because it's drums, you can specify things like, do I want fills? And if I do, how complicated do I want them? And do you want them to be 4 bars 8 bars, and if you put a cut in the timeline, so for example after 4 bars, it'll know there's a cut there and it'll put a fill in. Again, because it's drums, you can specify really fine detail. Do I want ghost notes on the snare? So right here. So now you've got some ghost notes. I can then decide, well, I like that feel, but I don't like the drum sound. So let me change to that. I don't even know what the sound will be like, but so that's more of a lighter kit. Back to here. You can save any of the things you like, and you can now go a bit further. You could say, actually, you know what? I don't want the hi-hat to be as busy, or I want the hi-hat to now be a tom-tom, so you can change that there. You could also, if you've already got another element down, you could say, with the detail of this, I'd actually like it, as a human being would do, to follow something. Or you could say, this is my main pattern, but I also want some extra kinks put in here. And you notice it's adding those in? Now, obviously, I'm not really concentrating on what this song is, but that's the first part. Second part is a bass. Again, let me just load some. This was a bass I put in earlier, but I can change it in real time. So now we've got drums and a bit of bass. And I can change that by saying, well, actually, you know what? I'm going to try that preset. And I want just a basic groove like that. So now I've got that going with the drums. And back to what I said about the fill, it's put a fill in for me. Keyboards. And this is still being generated in real time. And then there's one further trick after I put a keyboard in. So here's a piano. And again, same thing, I can, put more bits in. I can decide, with the 2 hands, I can decide I want some fifths in it. I want less chords. I can make the chords smaller. I could make no fills at all, lots of fills. Or I could, with detail, put some more notes in. I could also here, this is quite a nice little trick, you can say, well, I'm going to put, say, those there, so I know I've got some emphasis beats on certain points. Now, I don't know where we're going with it, but the next thing that you can do that's really brilliant is you can now convert that to MIDI. So essentially, by converting it to MIDI, like here, or you can bounce it down. When you convert it to MIDI, it means that you can edit the track on a forensic detail or change to your own sound. So, for example, if I wanted that piano, which is quite nice, but if I said, you know what, actually, I don't really love that piano much. Maybe I'll change it, to something else. You can very simply go to a different sound, edit the MIDI, change around how you do it. So then it becomes very much your interpretation of it. And of course, you could store that for next time, that could be your starting point. And any of these presets, by the way, back to piano, for example, where there were the little presets here, you can save, look, you could save your own version. So where I'd added those additional bits, I could save that, Steve's bit, and then next time I start, I could start from that point, and so it would be constantly evolving. All of that MIDI is being generated, as I said, in real time, so it does give you a really large amount of options in terms of human input. You're not actually just relying on this. Once you've got something like this, of course, before you convert it, you can also change tempo, and you could go, if I go right down in tempo, or up. You notice how when I change tempo, it knows what I'm doing and then makes appropriate changes to that, which is really, really fantastic. The other thing that it also has as a sort of intelligence thing is, if you notice there's these, if you name sections, it knows that an intro would be different to a verse, which would be different to a chorus. So if I wanted to copy that bridge section, for example, there, to a whole nother section in the song, you just hold the key down, drag it to a blank bit at the end, like say there. It's inserted everything around there, but because it's further down in the song, And actually, one thing I've just realised, because I made a fake chord progression, which is different to the front, it will have adjusted the chords as well. I would have probably had the same chords, but in this example, that's actually pretty good. It's instantly adjusted the chords to go with my changes. And if you need to change the key, which is the burden of a producer, the vocalist comes in and says, I can't sing it in that key. Again, you could change the key really easy. So you can temp sketch a song before you end up having the problem of bringing musicians. So if I use this, I absolutely would bring my musicians in to play, but it's allowing me to establish really, really good protocol as to how I want to do it and how I want to. But the power of the editing is really just incredible. I mean, for example, with the bass in particular, if you convert that to a MIDI region, for example, just this one here, you notice a couple of things. You notice it puts the chords underneath it so that you've always got a memory of where those chords came from. And secondly, if you then copy that to a key change, so for example, if that song had a key change in it, those chords would adjust, which is incredible. And secondly, when you open this up in the edit, this is down to forensic editing. If I was on, let's say this note. Now, one of the things that's incredible about sampling of today versus when I used to first sample is these are just not single notes. If you notice here, there's articulation. So you could make that note there, for example, a slide by just going. So then now it's got a slide. So you can now go through the part that was suggested to you and tailor it a little bit further if you wanted to. And you can get some great results, particularly if I wanted, for example, that note to be longer. I can just fiddle around with it to my heart's content because I've converted the artificial instrument into now a real instrument. And of course, I could change the sound. I mean, I'll use that as an example. Just one final thing with the piano, because very often with the piano, I think we were saying about emotion, sampling is a really interesting art. You sometimes have, I've got hundreds and hundreds of piano samples, but sometimes only one fits a particular song, and you cannot work out why that is. It just seems to have an emotional resonance with the singer, and they go, I really love that sound, and you literally can't change it. I was working with a band recently where they did some work at home and they used a very, very cheap little keyboard sound. We finished the record, but we had to go back to the demo sound because it had a relationship with her lead vocal, even though we did a new vocal, but she loved the sound so much. So by having MIDI here on this particular sound, if I just press play, I can quickly change that. I mean, I don't know if this is going to sound any good or not, but let's say I wanted to change it to, I don't even know what to use. I mean, I've got so many things here. Let me try, what shall I try? Let's try an organ, just for the hell of it. So I've now changed that little sound. And of course, being an organ, I can change the stops. So that, I might prefer, if I listen to that in the track very quickly. There you go. Sounded slightly better than before, so I'll save that. So that's the great thing of composing and making things up. You just never know where you're going to. I've no idea what this song is, by the way. It literally was a sketch that I did for this. So that's how I would use it in the creation way. And then the final way, I just close this down, is in mastering. And as I mentioned, the requirements of my radio shows are very, very specific now with levels and things like that. So behind here is the latest record that I've worked on, which is, I spoke earlier about May, she's Welsh, and we have a big Welsh running. This song is actually in English. So this is my original multi-track for the song. We finished the song and the mix of said record. If you're in the UK, it's on the Jazz FM playlist this week. So this is the song as it left my studio, but not mastered. So. And have a look at the level and the waveform. So I've got natural dynamics, which I absolutely don't want to lose, but as a rule of thumb, for if there's any budding producers here, give yourself at least 5 dB of headroom. You need that in order to master. So, that's the mix. We're totally happy with the mix. Listen to it on everything, but now we need to prepare it for the marketplace. So I use a piece of software that was mentioned earlier. It's a brand new piece of software called Ozone. It's really a powerful, powerful tool. It allows you a sort of level of detail, granular detail, that is quite incredible. And how it works is, what I'm going to have to, because it does take a while to do it, is the very first thing it does is it allows you, so I'm going to go back through the process. So you've got your track, you insert the plugin, which everyone can see, and then you press, this might go loud in a second, so just be aware. So you press play. So what that's doing is analysing the whole track, analysing the highs and lows, analysing the sonic content of it, and then in 1 second it will jump. Now, for the musicians amongst us, back to key, one of the problems I had with this song was we rehearsed it, and she couldn't sing it in that key, so we had to do it in E flat. And for a bass player, that's really, because I hate 5-string basses, I love 4-string, and it's a retro song, so it had to be a 4-string bass. So Jesse, our bass player, had to tune down in order to play the part. That creates a real horrible situation in mastering, because now you've got this sort of low end that's a little bit floppy and fluffy, but you've still got all the other instruments like the kick drum and everything set up for the original key. And a piece of software like this is absolutely phenomenal to be able to address that, because it has a, I'm just going to load back in my preset so you know. So hang on 1 second. So if you just go up 1 and down 1. And what it does is it has this thing called bass focus. In fact, let me just show you the module. Where are we? And you can see by here, loads of people have given you suggested, if you're not experienced, famous producers have given you presets, and that allows you the ability to zoom in on it and solo things, and really, and with Logic, the one thing I also like to do is check with meters what's actually going on, because if I do it one more time, you'll watch the meters. Hang on. And if I bypass it here, I'll relearn. Hang on 1 sec. This may jump again. I lost what I thought I was. I should have told you from the start. So if we take one of the particular modules, like say the equalizer, can you see what it's done? It's compensating for the fact that now I'm just soloing what that's doing, and it's really important how each module adds. So for example, in the clarity, what it's doing there is around her vocal, it's just pulling out these frequencies but boosting this little area. It has even got a module in it that if we were to make a slight mistake on the mix, this module here allows you to actually push the vocal up a little bit using the same technology that I showed you in the other program, but keeping the mix the same, but just pushing it up. So after all the work that I've done, and this takes maybe an hour, maybe a couple of hours just to go through, you've got to listen to it 1,000,000 times. This is now the finished version, and this track. I'm just going to switch the other track, chaps. So this is now the mastered version. You can see it's much louder, and sonically, it's hard in here to do an A/B, but believe me, it sounds a lot better. Somehow my brain can go to all the ways I feel you so. Sometimes I wonder. And also, if if I move to the middle of the song, where there's a breakdown, it's preserved my dynamic range, which is absolutely fantastic.
The silent way you change the future. I call it in. My roots returning.
And although we were talking about AI, everything on that track is real. That's every human being played every single part of that. Horns, everything. And underneath here, I have my instrumental tracks, which again is very, very important. Certainly in the UK, broadcasters like to have the instrumental version. So I'm able to then do exactly the same with the instrumental version. And I've also, just for emergencies, did a vocal up, down. It's just always safe to do that. But by having them all in the timeline, it means that if a producer, I mean, this is more a UK thing, but sometimes the BBC, if we're lucky enough to get it used as continuity, they sometimes want instrumental, 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 last chorus, and that's it. And so with something like this, I could cut a bespoke version literally 5 minutes later than they make the request of it. So that's how, in my world, there's nothing but positive praise for the behind-the-scenes technology. Using the example I did in the panel, I don't want to clean my house with a dustpan and brush. I'd rather use a Hoover. And with something like this, it's the same, or for vacuum cleaner rather than UK. Hoover's UK brand. This takes some of the sort of heavy load off and really helps. But also, as I said, this software is available much cheaper as a cut-down version for more home recording professionals, which means that they can have the same access to the same technology, which I think is really powerful. So if they do record at home and want to release it on Spotify or whatever, at least it's going to sound as good as it possibly can be. So those are my 3 examples. That's kind of my demo. If there's any questions or if you want to see anything again, we have a roving mic. We have immediately a question there, gentleman in teal, and then I can load the songs back in or go through it. Yes, sir.
Yes, good evening. First of all, thank you for this demonstration. I have 2 actual questions. The first part of your demonstrations, have you ever used non-repetitive music in those instruments, in those kind of tools? And have you seen any problems with that? Nothing
what do you
out
mean
of
by
a song.
What do you mean non-repetitive?
Well, not a song. Let's say a string quartet players playing something that's not repetitive. It doesn't have a chord progression, but instead it has actual music played on and not actually repeating itself.
Yes, there's a couple of other programs that I have. There's one called Orchestra, which I don't know if there's other people have got. So essentially that's a set of sound samples. It has a built-in sequencer in it, so you can specify rhythms, and then when you hold the keys down, it plays those rhythms, and you don't have to ever go back to the beginning. Once you've put that MIDI in, you can drag that MIDI to another Logic track, and then it has another AI thing where it will generate a melody based on what you've played. It kind of looks at some of the top. So yes, not so much in pop music, but when I do game music or television things, doing a cue where you want a beginning, a middle and an end, but you never need to go back here, then yes. So it does work. I wouldn't use the stuff that I've just shown you for that, because it's designed really to work with the inbuilt sounds. And your second question?
The other question is about, could you share with us an instance of misusage of these tools, something that was absurd to you, seeing that or coming across to it?
Misuse, I don't understand.
Not the result that you would like, or things like that are out of the map.
In more cases, happy accidents. So, for example, there's a track I worked with another artist who was more of a sort of lo-fi soul artist, and she sang a cappella to me, first of all, just to a click, because she said, I've got this idea for a song, it goes like this. So she just needed a little beat. And I did use that just to give me more than a beat. And when I loaded the song back in, it didn't load in properly. It lost, because you notice I've got my drives here. All those sounds are quite big. They're on separate drives. And when it loaded the song back in, it just loaded like a load of default things in, but they were like really weird sort of electronic sounds. And she went, oh, I really like that. What have you done? I went, oh, it's... So happy accidents every time.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I think we have one more question.
Yeah, hi. That was a brilliant demonstration. Thank you very much. Now I can safely say that this is a fantastic, terrific mixer. But suppose I have to give a command to any app, like let's say ChatGPT, and I give a prompt, a very curated, beautiful prompt. Do you think that it will create such quality result?
Well, there's two arguments. Logic is working within itself, so you don't have to do word prompts. Although actually, they've just added on the latest release in the notepad here. See that thing there? You can, if you've got some, if a bit stuck on a word or a line, it will actually improve. Well, not improve, but it will hint for you. In terms of what you're saying is, a lot of the external programs that do creative drones or rhythms can export as MIDI. So once you've got that over there, then on Logic, all you would need to do would be to import it as a MIDI track here, and you'd have to set a couple of preferences. When I'm importing it, I want it to track the tempo, and if it's multiple tracks, it's absolutely essential that you say, these are all from the same thing. Then what happens is Logic imports them all with the timestamp, but they're all as one thing. So if you did that on an external thing, it would absolutely be fine. And if you're using one of the third-party, particularly if it's orchestral, one of those third-party orchestral libraries that we were discussing earlier, like Spitfire or Native Instruments, those are stunning. I mean, they're really stunning. So I don't think you'd be disappointed. In fact, they'd probably be improved on the basic idea.
Can we combine various other instruments? Because this is all classic Western, but can we combine East and West?
Absolutely. So there are Logic itself has a load of microtonal samples, but there are loads, and particularly with Native Instruments, there's loads of external libraries that have different tonals, and you can set Logic up so that they're quarter tones. You have to just do it in the preferences, and it's remembered for that particular song. So you've got like a little keyboard, and you say they're quarter tones or however you want to do it. So absolutely, yeah.
So let's move. Time is running. So afterwards, please. Okay.